Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us to the Inclusive Circle. My name is Anne Welsh. I'm your host for tonight. We have the wonderful mayor here with us. How worshipful, the mayor of Hammersmith and Fulham, Councillor Patricia Quinley. Thank you so much for joining us for this amazing talk.
Thank you, Anne. Um, it's amazing to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Um, and it's really good to be here at Kindred again for the Inclusive Circle, which is actually a really powerful initiative by Bullock Inclusion. I was here back at the last event and at the fashion show. I think back in February, where you were strutting your stuff, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I'd like to welcome the panelists and, of course, the team at Bullock Inclusion for their leadership and vision in bringing this important conversation to life. The truth is that many disabled people in the borough and across the country face challenges on a daily life that are compounded not only by the barriers in accessibility but also the systems that should be supporting them, and too often they actually fall short. I just want to say I'm a member. I wrote the Disabled People's. I was a member of the Disabled People's Commission. So I understand, obviously, being a disabled woman. And I'm so honoured that you have brought this to my borough. I'm extremely grateful because I think it's a very, very important conversation and it needs to continue. Unfortunately, because I'm wearing this thing, I'm actually not able to say much about it. So I will hope you will forgive me for not being too gobby tonight. I want to thank Bullet Conclusion for creating this space. And it's a space to listen and to share and to begin shaping a more compassionate and inclusive future. And if anybody knows anything about Hammersmith and Fulham borough, we are a very compassionate and kind borough, and we truly believe in inclusivity. And to everyone here tonight, I want to thank you for showing up, for caring, for being part of the conversation that needs to be heard far and wide. Your voices are crucial and they really do matter. So just please keep speaking. And I just want to actually say thank you. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversations. Thank you, Anne.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor, for this amazing introduction, and we'll be leading you. Okay, we're going to get started. So, hello and welcome to the Inclusive Circle again, and special thank you to the CEO, Samantha Bullock, for putting this event together. For those who don't know, the Inclusive Circle objective is to empower and support programs for people with disability, providing them with a safe and supportive space to exchange experience, learn from experts, and develop strategies for navigating life as a disabled person. My name is Anne Welsh. I have sickle cell anemia, and that's my disability. My disability is invisible, so you can't tell that I have sickle cell. I spend my days in hospitals, and I'm normally intensive care. I've been there severally, and last year, with living with sickle cell is really challenging because of its invisibility. People can't tell that I have this pain, ongoing struggle where I live on painkiller daily. With the topic today, which I'm so delighted when Samantha asked me to moderate and host this panel. Our topic today is about benefit cuts and the impact on the disability community. With so many people facing challenges, our goal today is to provide clarity, support, and practical guidance on how to change and change that narrative, help the government make better decisions. We're not here to challenge whatever government has to do because we know the certain decisions need to be done. But we're here to have that discussion with people who are beneficiary or who deal with it on a normal circumstances. A key fact before we dive into it, more than 3 million households will lose out as a result of the government's sweeping cuts to the welfare, with an extra 250,000 people falling into relatively poverty because of this decision. We want to understand, if you are being impacted, how would you deal with the issue? This evening, I am excited and really privileged to have remarkable guests joining our panel discussion. They will be sharing their insight, real life experiences, and practical advice to help us better understand the situation. First of all, we have Dan. I will let Dan to briefly introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Edge. If a visual description will benefit you, I am a white male with long curly blonde hair. Occasionally, I get Thor references. I don't know why. And a stubbly beard. I work as an actor, performer, and access coordinator. But one of the main reasons I am here is I'm also heavily involved in the trade union movement, and I sit on the governing council of Equity, the Actor and Performers Trade Union, where I represent all our deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent members. And with the announcement of these potential benefit cuts, I've been working with our tax and welfare team to try and glean as much information as possible. So hopefully I can pass some ideas and thoughts on to you around that.
Thank you. Our next esteemed guest is Mark. Mark, I will let you introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out the right distance to the microphone so it doesn't go too much. I usually talk too loud, as you can hear, but that's ADHD and autism speaking, so to speak. And now there's a siren distracting me, so I forgot what I was going to say. But I'm Mark Goblow. Hi. I guess a lot of this journey started with my daughter, who was diagnosed autistic, ADHD, and later on epilepsy and profound and multiple learning disabilities. She's now 23, and she has no sort of language most people would understand. So I guess they call her non-speaking as opposed to non-verbal, whatever. And that's a pretty big challenge if you're 23. And effectively, that's the rest of your life, trying to express yourself. So self-expression, I could see, is so important. I spent all that time advocating for her in London. She was born near London Bridge. Myself, my background's digital tech, so I was doing all that alongside it. And I kind of realized, after dealing with a lot of employers in the creative industries as CTO and Accenture, I started to realize it wasn't for me working for other people. And finally, I got assessed and diagnosed myself, autistic and ADHD. A lot of things made sense after that. And it's always really good to share whatever you can about your journey to others and vice versa. I've always learned a lot from people that way, and also being online. So being digital early on helped a lot with accessing the information I always needed. Things like the law, what your rights are, entitlements, For all of us, I think we've got to find ways to give ourselves a bit of power. I guess apart from all the digital tech stuff, and I'm now doing an R&D startup to look at how we can reclaim innovation for all of us. With AI and all the rest of it, and cut through all the hype and the big tech stuff. Apart from that, I chair the Regional Stakeholder Network for Greater London that advises the Disability Unit in Cabinet Office and the Minister for Disabled People, Stephen Timms, whom I see quite often, and even at least 2 or 3 times this week for some reason. He seems to be everywhere. That's a key part of that is to bring in the views of ordinary Londoners to share their experiences that we can channel directly back to government and also to respond at what they share to us. So I think that's really important, and I'm trying to make sure that I can apply some of my knowledge to connect up people, not just ourselves as members, but also more broadly the whole community here, because I think that's what's so important, to sort of keep ourselves a bit more resilient and see what we can do with collective action. I probably forgot a lot of stuff, but that's way too long.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Our final guest this evening is Aaron. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaron. I'm one of the directors at the Disability Policy Centre. We're the UK's leading every disability think tank, and we're a team of disabled researchers that are trying to use our work and our lived experience to enact real change for disabled people and carers through policy changes. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here and talk about the work that I've done leading on benefits, welfare, and employment as well from the organisation.
Well, we must say thank you so much to you three for taking the time out. Yes. The topic today is very sensitive. Some organization might not feel comfortable talking about this topic because of the sensitivity around it. And I'm so honored that you made time to come out here to join this inclusive circle to talk about it. So my key question, I'll start off with Mark here. You've experienced as a tech leader, a child with disability, you've lived that life, and I'm sure you understand where this is going with the government. With your work advising the government on technology, what impact would this have on disabled people?
I want to make sure that any forces that are going on, things like technology, we now know, and AI and the rest, is sort of cutting across so many things. Not to mention the DWP using it to help assess work capacity, but also how it's been helpful to some people in terms of augmenting their communication needs in order to reach others more effectively. So it's really a two-pronged thing. And it's being eyes wide open around awareness and the risks in that. But it's also because I taught myself everything. I never could deal with the standard educational models. So technology is a way for me to get into something that built my own skills, and then I could use that to do a career and then become more independent and get the autonomy I really needed. So to be honest with you, technology has served me in a number of ways, not just about its effects, but in allowing me to find a way to improve my lot in a way I could do so. And I've seen how it's so important, say, to my daughter, where nobody's figured out how to teach her yet, but she's gone and taught herself how to use tech. even though she has no speaking language with other people or reading or writing. So that's amazing because it gave her an engagement, a sense of control where she doesn't have it anywhere else in her life. And so it serves her well as also in terms of that needed autonomy. So those are just a few things. And I hope going forward, we'll look at more ways to reclaim it for us rather than allow it to kind of control us, let's say. But anyway, hopefully that helped a
Yeah.
little bit.
No, that helped. Aaron, this is for you. You have a background in investment banking and research. And I want to know, how has that shaped your policy in dealing with disabled people living standards? Understanding what is required because you're now on this policy side. How has that shaped your life in everyday work?
Yeah, thanks. So I began life as an investment banker in corporate finance, and that's how I did for a good few years before moving to the Disability Policy Centre. And one of the things I've tried to make sure is that understanding of economics, the idea of how data and information can build a fuller story, how does that work? And that means when it comes to our work on living standards or welfare, it means we can be very proactive in our work and we can use that to inform real insight. So just looking at the example of welfare changes, our latest work when the Green Paper came out was to highlight the fact that 90% of the savings probably won't occur in reality because most of this isn't workable based on looking at a decade of previous government reforms. And the other aspect is that from the economics background, even the savings you do get through, the savings will be offset by knock-on costs for the NHS, additional appeals, those sort of factors. So the real savings will be about 2%. And that's sort of the way my background in data and economics has led sort of impacting policy and changing the narrative for disabled people as well.
Oh, that's great. These questions are now just touching individual bits before we dive into the deep question. Dan, you are a man of many things. I mean, if you don't know Dan, he's a wrestler, he's an artist, you do so much. And one of the things what changes do you believe are most urgently needed in the performing arts? Because I'm thinking we're targeting that base first for people with disability.
Oh, what changes are needed in the performing arts for disabled people? Funnily enough, funding is probably the biggest part. Because you tend to find previous government probably more than this one, hopefully, because the current government are forming their policies. But the arts is the first to lose funding because the arts tends to hold people to account. We're there to challenge social narratives. You look at the success of things like Mr. Bates and the Post Office on ITV and how that completely changed the conversation around the post office scandal and how all of a sudden it became the front of political and public thought. That was the arts that did that because that campaign had been going on for decades beforehand. And until the arts got involved, everybody kind of went, oh yeah, it's a thing. Then everybody watched the ITV drama and all of a sudden it becomes the top of the political agenda. The arts holds governments and legislators to account. So by removing our funding, it makes it more difficult. I mean, I could get into bigger things of how the arts generally needs to be made more accessible and how we need more accessible makeup trucks and all of those kind of things and the really technical stuff. But we need to fund the arts, especially when it comes to disability, because our voices are fresh, our voices are new in terms of the art space. And by centering disability narrative, it will give us more interesting stuff to watch.
Okay, the next question goes back to you again. As vice chairperson, Equity, Deaf and Disabled Member Committee, what is your understanding and thoughts on the recent benefit cuts in the UK and the primary reasons cited for the change?
Wow. Well, as well as working with the DDMC, I actually sit on Equity's governing council, so I sit across the entire union. And as I said earlier, I get to work with our tax and welfare team. And much as you've just alluded to with the figures, it doesn't make sense on any level. So, for example, you've talked about knock-on costs to the NHS, and I think we're going to echo each other quite a bit here. If you take away disability benefits from artists, those are the things that help us, enable us to survive and access our work and travel to work and create work. So if those are removed, we can't make that work, as I've said previously, to hold government to account. And it doesn't make any financial sense. Let's throw out another stat. We've had some stats already. There's often been talk around how the benefits bill is ballooning, how PIP payments are going through sky high. But spending on welfare is at a 10-year low. So it's not ballooning, it's lower than it's ever been for the last decade. And the reason that PIP figures may be exploding is because the pension age has gone up, but that's never mentioned. So people are claiming PIP for 5 years longer than they would have done because their pensions aren't coming into place. There's lots of little things like that. And so what my work with Equity and the trade union enables me to do, and we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, is helps me figure out ways that us as a deaf, disabled and neurodivergent community can take action and make our voices heard to those in power. But I'll pass it on to my colleagues now.
Mark, following on from what Dan just said, what do you believe are the most significant short-term and long-term impacts of these cuts on disabled community?
Of course, it is so wide-ranging, and everybody is really different. Their needs are very different, and I don't want to be in my shell being a neurodivergent when there are so many other different types of needs that get affected. My main issue is that this is a matter of equity. So equity is about leveling up everybody to be able to access what's out there in society, particularly what wasn't built for them. So to be undermining that equity to be able to access, like anyone else, what's out there is really a bit, it shows a complete misunderstanding or a different mindset, unfortunately, that needs to be shifted. The idea that people are responsible for their, let's say, needing equity places the burden on them and the costs on them, rather than making society more inclusive around them. And this sort of thing where it's cutting at this equity is one of the biggest problems, because it's promoting all that old again, blaming the wrong people, and it's not their fault, but also reinforcing some of the older stigmas that we were hoping to have gotten rid of, particularly where we're trying to, close the gap in employment between those who are disabled and non-disabled. The gap is persistent and has not really changed for so many years. That's what the Disability Employment Charter and its anniversary went to highlighted. And to do this now is just going to cut it down, because one thing I want to say is that I think one of the stats, again, is that something like 73% of people do not know all the little things that disabled people need to do to be able to do the same thing as others, say to go into work and to be in the workplace and to come back home. There are so many things that need to be organized and planned in advance, that many moving parts that all need that support. and cutting it away through things like PIP to not recognize that people also fluctuate in their needs also is a huge problem. It just does not understand the lives of disabled people, this sort of thing. So I'm just trying to put out a few of those obvious points. And I do think we have to think about converting those mindsets in different ways, but we'll come to that.
Thank you. Aaron, some experts are concerned that the cuts will make it harder for individuals to access essential support services like food banks. How can this be mitigated?
I think the first thing that's important is to understand the great way in which PIP works, especially compared to other countries. PIP is a cash benefit. Other countries like France and New Zealand, you don't get the cash. It's either a receipt, you either have to get a certain expense and get a certain receipt, or it's for specific things. What's really good about PIP is that it says the best person to manage their needs is the disabled person themselves. And that is something that's very, very hard to replace, even if there were certain other things. So just talking about PIP, the people most affected will be those currently just on standard daily living, which will, surprisingly is about 85% of everyone on standard daily living. So it covers a broad range of needs. And it's about how can you find that support that you need that you might not lose. Government is asking this question as well because they don't know. And that's one of their consultation questions. But I think when it comes to not getting points now for your aids, which is one of the things that your PIP points don't count for anymore, or don't exclusively entitle you to PIP, how can you get that support elsewhere? Things like community occupational therapy, things that can provide those aids that would help you in the bath, in the kitchen and cooking, are also really important if that cash is not available. But the government just hasn't joined the dots on that. They've simply said, well, if you require aids, that's not enough to get you on, not enough for you to be entitled for PIP. But they don't say, well, how do we go about providing those aids in the first place? So that's one of the key ways to mitigate it.
That's so helpful. Yeah, because I think the way you've described it gives us more clarity about how the use of funds, having access to it, and then using that fund to do what you choose to do as a disabled person, because only you know what your needs are, rather than someone dictating it to you. So I think that was really good. We're going into understanding the impact here, because we need to understand the clear impact of this if when this happens. This is back to Dan. Are there specific demographic groups within the disability community that you feel will be, disproportionately affected?
Wow. I think you've hit it on the head. It's those that are getting the standard daily living component are probably going to be most affected from an instant money perspective. But one of the other policies that the government is looking at putting into place is essentially imagining that disabled people don't exist between the ages of 19 and 22. They just don't exist, everybody. So if you're between 19 and 22 and these changes come into force, you will not get any kind of PIP level support just because disabled people when they're 19 to 22 don't exist. Now, I am the princely age of 40, but I was disabled when I was 19, 20, 21, 22. It didn't stop. It didn't stop. I've had cerebral palsy all my life. So this theory that particular group of young people are just going to lose support just because they happen to be that age is bonkers to me. And the fact that, there has always been somewhat of a cliff edge when deaf, disabled, or neurodivergent people leave education, in the fact that physiotherapy support disappears, support that you had in a classroom doesn't exist in the workplace, that disappears. But then to remove PIP support on top of that just makes that cliff face all the more sheer and all the more dangerous.
Back to Aaron again. As a member of the Disability Policy Center, what do you think are the most overlooked challenges that people with disability will face as a result of these changes?
Yeah, I think this has been touched on a little bit already. Um, we've just talked about, Mark talked about employment, and the onus is always on the disabled person. So the whole point is that it's they need to be incentivized to go and find work. It's never about what are all the barriers in the first place. What about the fact there's 4% of jobs advertised are part time. There aren't flexible jobs. On top of traveling into work, all the other barriers you face, as Mark has really outlined, that go into your journey before you even start the job. I think the most overlooked thing is about how harmful these narratives can be. I think is the sense that when the Prime Minister talks about sort of a ballooning welfare bill and refers to it as a bill, it's this, we could treat it as something that is just there to be cut. We implicitly imply that there's no inherent value in supporting disabled people in this way. And when you have those narratives, it's very, very hard to push back on that. I think that's something that's really overlooked. And then the other aspect is just going back to knock-on effects, is just how all these knock-on effects will appear. So you have cuts to PIP, but PIP is a passporting benefit for things like carer's allowance. So if you have a carer, they'll also lose that support. You also know that PIP counts as qualifying income for social care. So if you cut that income, the council then has to come up with the extra money, and the council can't easily come up with those extra funds. So every pound you lose in benefits, other studies have shown this, needs to an extra £1.50 cost for the council. So this is the other aspect, but what about those knock-on effects for additional services as well? I think those two are the main.
Okay. Mark, as the founder for Tech for Disability website, from your perspective, how well informed do you think the public are about the implication of these benefit cuts?
Yeah, as I said a bit earlier, there's some figures around that sort of misinformed, not just the government, but the public as well. And that's about, say, a lot of popular media and social media becoming people's choices for how they receive information. So that's sort of obviously skewing the story to people unless they've been exposed or know people who are being affected. So this is always the issue. I mean, it's fine if people know somebody else is going to be affected directly and they're exposed to this. But when they aren't, as a whole, they just get this, as Dan's been mentioning, other narratives that are controlled through these sort of sources. So that's not very good. And obviously, I think what I'd like to see is to respond to that in our own ways, using the same sort of tools where possible. So I guess if we're looking at, in terms of Tech for Disability, we're a group within the London startup ecosystem, and we are raising the voices of disabled people, but we're also supporting lived experience in creating some of this innovation, to take it into our own hands and reclaim some of this. And by using lived experience, we will be able to build better tools, and those tools we would use to spread our own words, our own voices, to kind of address all these narratives and online sorts of things that are flying around that we can't control. So a lot of that comes down to just finding out what tools we can use and fighting sort of like for like, to be honest with you. Apart from tech, I was raised by a journalist, and I understood at a very young age what the influence of media could do. And now that it's driven so much by digital, the two things really need to be thought about in terms of how we respond and replace these narratives with our own.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will go on to one last question. I think we have to go to the audience as well. Or should I keep going? Okay. So, Dan, moving on to the government's role and policy consideration. Yeah. What should the government do to minimize the negative impacts of this benefit cut on vulnerable community again? What should they do?
I mean, if I'm being really controversial, not cut it in the first place, is the simple answer. But I definitely think, you know, the words lived experience have been used on this stage countless times, and that's for good reason. Because what they haven't done, or they claim they are going to, although I feel their consultation has some gaps, mainly around the most important stuff, like what's going to score points on the new PIP application form. There is no consultation on that. I think they need to listen to deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent people, which at the moment they're not doing. Which is why organisations like Disabled People Against Cuts are organising mass lobbies at Parliament, which is why trade unions like ourselves at Equity are contacting politicians all the time. And I think, you know, you've just spoken about media and social media and claiming the narrative back. And I encourage everybody in this room, whether you're disabled or non-disabled, to contact your MP. Because you'd be amazed, even as a non-disabled person, how much power you have. Because it does reach a point where sometimes there will be politicians that go, oh, it's just the disabled people ranting again. But if the non-disabled community stand alongside us and we can engage them to join into our narrative, then they'll listen. Because the more of us there are, the more pressure we generate, and they will change policy. And there's many ways we can do that, and we might talk about that as this panel progresses. But I think the government need to listen to deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent people, and honestly consider reversing some of the decisions they've made.
Okay, Mark, picking up from what Dan has just said, as a collective, advocate and everyone, how can we move together, in your opinion, to make sure that we as the disabled community are being heard?
For sure, totally echo what Dan was saying about there, and I hope it comes out of this that there's a sense of needing to unite a lot and connect up across all the different communities and groups, because there are a lot, but unfortunately a lot are fragmented. They could be better connected, and I hope this kind of helps do that, combined with, of course, using some of the means we've got at our disposal to do this. But also, I was talking about changing narratives and mindsets, and I think one is there's a community level side that needs to happen. We can't wait for the top down stuff. We have to be very much coalescing at a community level, joining up and taking it higher up, the bottom up approach, so to speak. But the other thing is we have to change minds outside of the communities too. So we do have a job to change some of these mindsets that reinforce the stigma or the misinformation, etc. So we need to get involved with certainly MPs, government, but also any other areas we know that have influence, whether it's education or business, etc., and get that out and build allies to and bring them over to our side, because that is a pathway to the decision makers, especially if we get allies on our side. It sounds kind of fuzzy, but actually you can find people who are receptive to this in all areas, whether it's government, business, nonprofits, etc., and at different levels and work through. So that's something that has to happen outside the community, not just within our bubble as well. That's pretty important.
Aaron, I just want to ask you, for those who might be affected by the cuts, what practical advice would you give them from your knowledge?
I think for those most affected, it's actually on an individual level, it's about recognizing and in many cases persevering. So until 2 weeks ago, I was actually one of the people who would be affected by the cuts. I only had 8 points standard living on my PIP, only 2-point descriptors. And I've been waiting 2 years to be reassessed, and I had my PIP tribunal last week. And within 2 minutes, I went into the room. Before we even began, the judge said, on the basis of the evidence, we'll award you enhanced on both anyway. And that was the case on the exact same facts that they reached that decision very clearly. And all that made me realize is that in that case, it was a case of being able to persevere and sort of advocate for yourself on a very individual level. And I think that's really, really important and can really get lost. And I know how disheartening the PIP process can be, but I think it's still really important as well.
Oh, that's really helpful, and thank you so much for sharing that personal story. I have a final question for our guests, but if there's any other question, if anyone has questions, do let me know. But I could go ahead and because I have one final question for everyone here. Mark, what sign of hope or positive change do you see emerging in this fight for fair and adequate disabled support?
Right. There are some. I mean, I do always retain some optimism, because one thing is that we've all had to deal with adversity. That's just in the nature of this, right? So I think there's a huge amount of resilience amongst us all, that you could say is shared in common. And with that comes a lot of strength, and it's going to be always an eternal battle. So this is yet one of them, maybe it's one of the more difficult ones. It won't be the only one, and we all know that. We've already seen plenty of problems before, and we'll see more of them again. So I hope that a lot of this will just bring out a lot more of that resilience and strength. Plus, as I say, there's so much better awareness now in terms of our needs that we can take and diffuse much better than we could before. And I think just thinking about it 20 years back when I was advocating for my daughter after she was diagnosed, it was just lots of blank faces and disconnections. And now it's a lot easier to explain things, so you can spend more time on doing the right things. So maybe that's a bit vague, but I think that's resilience, and then taking things into our control and looking at that sort of community level organizing I mentioned to build some real good joined up horizontal communities. And bring that to the table, I think, is the way to go. Don't wait for government or people at the top to really kind of respond. I mean, we have to start doing this ourselves and exchanging information amongst ourselves so we each learn from each other. We have that ability, and we can probably, sort of do a lot more from our side towards them, and rather than waiting around and for the next round of cuts, which will come up, because unfortunately that's some of the mindset we have to chip away at still.
Thank you so much, Mark. Dan, I don't know if you want to say something, the final words. What action can we take to ensure future policy are more inclusive?
What action can we take? Well, some of it's been mentioned already. Contact your MP, get other people to contact your MP, bombard their inboxes like it's Christmas presents, fill them to the point that they can't ignore you. If you are in a particular profession, join your trade union, be a voice there if you are able to. And if what I was saying to somebody earlier, when it comes to campaigns, when it comes to putting pressure on power, we're all, well, many of us in this room are deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent, and we all have days where we just can't because it's energy levels. But if we take the days that we can and we add it to the days where other people can do it when we can't, the pressure is constant. So just engage with the process and get shouting. And if you can get to Parliament, do. If you can email your MP, do. Even if it's just a thing on X or Blue Sky or Facebook, that, you know, because you're in bed that day and you're like, this is important though, people need to see it. Because the more people see it, the more they hopefully engage with it, the more of a power base we have. Because there's strength in numbers. So engage with the process. Don't go, oh, it's politics, I don't get it, it doesn't affect me. Politics affects everything. So if you can engage in the process in whatever way you can, then do.
Aaron, do you want to add anything to that before we open it?
No, just to add that I think, I mean, when Dan talks about the role of lived experience, it is so important, and that's what's been missing in all the government's responses. The consultation is very cleverly tailored to miss all genuine consultation. And I think it's about how do we use that lived experience, this is what we try and do at the DPC, because nearly all of us have lived experience, to create change outside the sector. So things like, you know, just shops start thinking about disabled consumers when they know about the purple pound, so the extra spending and income they'd get.
Yeah.
If we can help use some of this to frame policies in that way, you know, telling the government they're not going to save money, or the government would be so much better to genuinely support disabled people into work, because that would also fix all our fiscal issues as well. It would raise about 40 billion by closing the employment gap a year in tax revenue. So getting policies out in that perspective is really, really important and will change things as well.
Thank you. Just want to open up to the audience in case anyone has any question.
Thanks, and thanks to the panelists for a really interesting discussion tonight. It's been really insightful. So my question is for Dan, and you know we've talked a lot about the impact on disabled people, and we've talked a lot about the costs that are going to be passed on to local authorities and how much more difficult it will be. But there is something else that's going on at the moment that makes all this far more dangerous, and I'm referring to the terminally ill adults end of life bill. That is due to submit its report this Friday at the House of Commons. So I'd just like to ask for your thoughts on how you see the causal effects from lowering benefits and cutting all these additional assistance, and the effect that will have when people then potentially have the option for assisted suicide.
Okay, so this is going to come more from a personal perspective. So because I know people have different views on this scenario, so I'm going to put that out from the start. I personally am not a fan of the bill. I think it makes life for deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent people in this country inherently more dangerous, because it's a bill that focuses on somebody's quality of life and whether their quality of life is deemed low enough, either through a terminal health condition as it currently stands, but as we've seen in nations like Canada, once you open Pandora's box, the goalposts tend to shift. So that is quite a scary scenario. While there are many people at the moment that'll go, oh, but there's all these things and it's only if you're terminally ill. Like I say, examples of Canada, and my colleague and good friend Liz Carr, if you haven't seen it already, did a phenomenal documentary on the BBC about this. I suggest you look it up. It's on iPlayer. The title of it escapes me, so if somebody in the room can remember it, please. But it's a phenomenal documentary. And I worry that the removal of benefits partnered with this bill, where the goalposts will eventually shift, create a perfect storm of condition that could lead to disabled people going, well, my quality of life is so poor because I can't afford to meet my own access requirements that I have no quality of life, and that is the best option. So it seriously concerns me on a personal level. I know there are lots of people through personal experiences that see some benefit to the bill, but it does concern me on a circular basis and how the goalposts may shift in the future. That's nice and positive, isn't it, everybody? So, but campaign, so if you feel strongly about that, again, in the same way that I'm saying campaign for the changes to PIP to be structured differently or not done, campaign on this as well if you can. Like you've mentioned that there's an event outside Parliament this week, engage with people, whatever side of the divide you may feel you're on, and campaign for what you feel is right. I'd suggest that to everybody. But what I will say is, when it comes to this particular bill, I don't think disabled voices have been listened to in the way they should have been. I think they've been excluded from the process on lots of levels. And we need to campaign hard if you feel that it's something that doesn't need to be on our legislative, try saying that when you're drunk, bills and in our law system, personally. But that is a very personal standpoint, and I understand that other people have different ideas.
Is there any other question?
Thank you. I'd like to ask, I know there's about 22 points on the green paper, but we're only allowed to consult on 10 of them and 12 we're not allowed to.
Is there anyone who wants to answer that? Okay.
I mean, that's exactly right. And what you can consult on is very defined to certain things. It's about what if you lose support, what things can be done to mitigate that, not why should you be losing support, or is the assessment system the best way. This is a very deliberate way to avoid genuine consultation. And the reason it's happened is because prior attempts to do changes to PIP without consultation have always, without proper consultation, have always faced legal challenge. So Ellen Clifford laid a judicial review against the previous government's reforms to work capability assessment, and the tribunal ruled that the consultation wasn't genuine because it wasn't showing the true purpose, which was to cut costs. So I think there's a mix of avoiding certain consultation questions here to avoid the process altogether, where you can justify it by not affecting vulnerable claimants in the way it's framed. I think that's the key part. And the other key part is that by not consulting on certain elements, you can put the changes in as quickly as possible. So MPs can vote for it in May and June, and you can get the changes out by November 2026 in order to balance the books by 2030. And that's the key real thing, I think, behind those things. But if anyone has anything else to add.
Sorry. I'll just say quickly, that's completely right. We saw not just that, but there were a number of consultations that were advertised across the UK through Eventbrite, things like that, and they all sold out pretty damn fast. So there are a number of problems also being able to get to the table to respond. I just want to say quickly that I would like to leverage our channels to just get, despite that, to get through some of this that isn't allowed to be sent through the forms they give us, but just to share the views of people in all the areas that matter to them, irrespective of that, to just bypass some of those channels a bit and go directly to some of the policymakers. That's what I just want to be able to leverage in terms of whatever we have, we'll use it to get these things across despite the sort of gates that are applied. So, and yes, one of the positive things I just wanted to mention is I am sure all this is going to be subject to a lot of legal um, um, challenges, because that is what happens. It was the case when they had the National Disability Strategy. It was stalled because people were successful in bringing to court the issue about insufficient consultation. And so we have to make use of these things going forward to be able to also bring this up and try to find whatever we can, any opportunities to get info or to block things as we've been able to do before. It does take time to know your rights and what can be done, but some of this is through clear history, and that's what we can use too.
And just to, put some positive energy out into the room, we've fought the government and we've won before. So we can do it again. Whether it was the Disability Discrimination Act and people chaining themselves to buses, don't recommend you do that right now. But that got us the Disability Discrimination Act. Whether it's Ellen Clifford's case, getting through the courts to say that the previous consultation was unlawful, whether it's the fact that disabled people, including representatives from my union, Equity, went to the United Nations and they said the government broke our human rights. There is many, many times we have won. So it's not all doom and gloom. But we've got to fight for it, otherwise we're going to lose it. So I get that it's hard, I get that it's difficult, but I implore you, please engage with the process in whatever way you can.
Is that it? Any final question?
Also, putting this up will have more impact on mental health, which is already a factor anyway in the first place, isn't it?
Let me get there.
Yeah, mental health is obviously a huge factor for everybody, because it's the fear of not knowing. It's the fear of not knowing what support you're going to have, if you're going to lose support, along with the mental health struggle of actually filling in a completely inaccessible 92-page form. All of this is strain on mental health. So on the same way that I turn around and say engage where you can, also please take time to protect yourself when you need to, because it's a group effort. So engage, but know that there are other people also engaging when you can't, and don't feel pressured if you're at a point where your mental health means you can't. But then recharge, revitalise, and come back and join us on the front line again.
I think also just quickly, it is a huge issue, and I hope there are ways that we can mitigate this, again, through knowing other people, learning from other people who've been through this, and helping other people where you've been through it. So a lot of exchange. As I said, there's space at community level and at city level. There are quite a few groups. There are definitely a lot of events like this one, at which people can come meet others and at least know you're not alone. I think that's a huge thing. And I realize some people cannot come out physically in the same place. So, of course, we want to be able to reach people and connect them digitally as well, by whatever means. We just want to make sure that people are aware they're not alone And there's a lot you can gain from speaking to other people, getting ideas, etc., that will lift you before you realize it to some degree. But it can be awfully hard. I totally appreciate it. But being connected is something we're going to have to really try to find out. And events like these, series like Inclusive Circle, are just, one part of this whole thing that does exist, and we can make use of that.
Do you want to say a final word?
Just, I think, look, just echoing what everyone said there, I think we all know how difficult the process can be, and especially on mental health. And although the government has tried to often minimise mental health in a lot of the narratives they push, or exclude even mental health from PIP, which is something they tried in 2017, that case fell apart completely. But tribunals and the independent process around PIP has always tried to support those with mental health conditions, and that's a big part in the tribunal process as well, when there is an independent doctor there and there is a disability expert. So they try and make sure at that stage that those factors are really considered, and they are really important.
Well, I want to say a big thank you to Dan, Mark, and Aaron. Could you give them a round of applause, please? Thank you so much to the Inclusive Circle for organising and putting this event together. I found it so helpful myself. Like I said, I have sickle cell, and I remembered when I went on disability living allowance and benefits initially at the beginning of my circle, I knew how difficult it was, and I literally went through the tribunal stage and I said, I can't do this anymore. I gave up, and I wish I had a circle like this where I could find meaningful, because I think with an invisible condition, no one takes it seriously. Even because my doctors always said, unless they take your blood, that's when they know how sick you are. But they will not do that. That's not part of the assessment process. The assessment process is answering questions. So putting up this meaningful thing is so helpful, and I appreciate this, Samantha and the Inclusive Circle, for this. I want to thank the sponsor, Blue Badge SS, Sean Trust Disability Power 100, Enable Rise Consultant, CRBE, Tatalik Gallo, and Kendall, the owner of this venue. I think we should give them applause, because they've given this venue to Inclusive Circle to have this inclusive meeting, and I think that we're really honored to have this space. European Investment Bank, Citrus Saint Agency, Open Style Lab, Payless Universal, which is my company, which I'm truly honored to be supporting this, Part to Success, Consult General of Brazil, B-Play. All of these guys, we want to show a deep appreciation for your supporting initiative like this. Should we clap for them one more time, and hopefully we get more sponsors to support us. The next event date is on the 16th of July 2025. We do hope you can make it. The whole focus of this event is to talk about the impact of diabetes. We'll be focusing on that, the overall impact of diabetes. We know it's a huge issue affecting so many people, from youngsters, and we get people from very young are getting the type 2 diabetes. We'll be understanding the impact, ways to manage diabetes, and who to speak to if you're a child, if you're a carer, who to speak to if you're about the issue. Thank you so much for coming. I do hope you still stay around and socialize, but I hope you found this event as useful as I did. And thank you for Samantha for organizing again. Thank you, everyone. We'll not forget the mayor as well. Thank you so much for your kind words this evening. Thank you.